in terms of themes, are there themes that you like to explore over other ones? I know you mentioned the anti-hero, but are there themes in The Flash that are similar to some of the themes in your other work?
Well, I mean, in a lot of cases, I seem to tell stories about either reluctant heroes or heroes who, you know, I mean, in the case of Blade, he's acting heroically, but sort of the rest of the world thinks he's a vigilante,
Right.
as is the case with Batman. In the case of Dark City, it's again sort of a hero acting alone, that's isolated
Right.
and whatnot. I don't think I would actually ever be good to write Superman because
Right.
it's the opposite.
He's
of that.
angst-free.
Yeah, and I wouldn't know the angle because I'm so angst-ridden
Right.
that, you know, I wouldn't know what to do with a character like that.
Right. Give him angst.
Right. Well, in the case of the Flash, the Wally West character, I mean, his angst is that he's a screw-up.
Right.
He's like the last person that you know, he gets these powers and the first thing he does is he just messes around.
Was Wally West Kid Flash?
Yeah. And then around 1980, 1981,
He became Flash?
He became the Flash. And so for the, you know, the bulk of the major generation of filmgoers that would be seeing that movie,
It's Wally West.
He's been Wally West.
Okay. You mentioned Dark City, you know, which is another film we worked on together. It's kind of become a cult favorite, but it's an odd movie. What were the biggest challenges in putting a movie like that together? Was that an idea that you collaborated with Alex on?
Alex Proyas
Yes.
had the initial idea.
Okay.
He had a treatment that he sent me that was amazing but incomprehensible.
Right.
And he knew it. And he said at the time, you know, I want you to sort of make a movie out of this with me. And he had directed The Crow, but it hadn't come out and I hadn't seen it. So
Right.
there was nothing to go on, and I just thought, this
Right.
is crazy. I turned it down. He went off, eventually found Lem Dobbs. They did a draft, and Lem is great, but Lem is also not known for writing.
Right.
You know, the guy that wrote Kafka.
Lem wrote The Limey, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
The Limey's great,
Yeah.
but if you got a kind of inscrutable Chinese box of a
Right.
movie, the guy that wrote Kafka may not be
Your guy.
the best
Yeah.
guy to kind of you know, make it a little less
Accessible.
Yeah, or more accessible. And so eventually I came back on, and my job was my whole point with Dark City was, I said to Alex, you've got all these, it takes place in kind of this parallel universe.
Right.
You've got all these weird rules, and it's fine for this universe to have different rules. They just have to be consistent rules.
Right.
So we just had to, there was no consistency in anything that was happening.
Right. So a big challenge is to make everything conform to one
Right,
set
and
of rules. So then you could suspend your disbelief and go with it.
Right, and it had a dream kind of logic, but I just said we just have to kind of codify
Right.
what these rules are. And, you know, the first scene I wrote for Dark City, I pointed out to Alex kind of something that I thought was obvious, which was, you know, the city always takes place at night, but no one ever comments on it.
Right.
That there is no daylight, or that there, you know.
Right.
And I just thought, well,
They might mention that.
yeah, that's like a big deal. So the first scene, I wrote that movie with Alex kind of out of order, and the first scene I did was this scene between, you know, the protagonist.
The Murdoch character?
The Murdoch character, and Bumstead, who's played by William Hurt. And it's, you know, he's being interrogated, and there's this moment where he says, let me ask you a question to Bumstead. Do you remember daylight? And that turned out to be kind of the pivotal scene in the
Right.
movie.
No, that got the existential thing going in the movie. In a movie with big ideas like that, do you have to fight for space with trying to get those themes in, but also have like character work and great one-liners, or you know?
Well, the thing about Dark City that was kind of nice is we were deliberately trying to do a movie that forced the audience to think.
Right.
And
Boy, did we get bit in the ass for that.
yeah, you did. You did. But the other problem with Dark City, even though it's a movie that I dearly love, is that it's a movie about a guy with amnesia.
Right.
Who sort of doesn't find himself and become more active a protagonist until the end of the movie. Last 15 minutes of the movie, Rufus Sewell is pretty cool.
Right.
But it's kind of hard to make a movie about a guy with amnesia when you cast an unknown. Before that, there was this moment where we were going to have Johnny Depp.
Right.
If it's Johnny Depp playing a guy with amnesia,
Right.
he's still Johnny Depp.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You've got a
Rufus
movie starring
disappears.
an unknown, and nobody knows who he is, and there's nothing to imbue with. But But another funny anecdote, we shot that movie in Sydney, Australia, and you don't like to fly. And so no one from New Line would ever come over to check on us because we were off in bumfuck part of the world.
Well, the ultimate irony is now as a producer, I just spent 7 months in
You had
Australia.
to go to Australia,
Yeah.
I know.
That scene in Dark City between Bumstead and Murdoch is a very pivotal scene, and it kind of sets the tone for that existential debate. Was that a difficult scene to come up with? I mean, once you had it, it fit in great, but did you guys struggle with that one?
No, we really didn't. It's the first scene I wrote. I sat home one night. Or actually, I was in Sydney at the time, and I wrote that scene, and we never changed it from that initial draft. That scene. The trick of Dark City was that it was a Chinese box of a movie, and so many things retroactively had to make sense, and we had these flow charts set up, and Alex and I were just constantly getting lost in our own logic.
Right.
But that was part of the fun of doing it.
In terms of your own writing, have you ever looked to other screenwriters for advice, or to have other writers read your stuff, or have you ever gotten really bad advice that put you on the wrong path? Or do you not open yourself up for that kind of?
Well, I mean, I do have people read my work before I turn it into studios. I've got 4 or 5 friends. Some of them are writers that read it. A more recent friend of mine, Mark Protasevich, who you've also worked with, wrote The Cell. He and I have taken to, and we write similar kinds of things. We give each other our drafts and give each other feedback. And it's very easy for Mark or myself reading his stuff to see kind of obvious plot holes that maybe other people might,
Right.
He'll call me up and say, you're kind of fudging it here.
Right.
And he'll keep me honest and I'll keep him honest. I think that's important as a writer to have, critical minds looking at your stuff and, telling you if it's not good enough.
Right. When did you decide to be a screenwriter? Was it always that for you, or did you come to it?
I was going to be a homicide detective in Michigan. I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I had been accepted to Michigan State, and I was going to get a degree in police administration and become a homicide detective. And some of my high school teachers just flipped out and called up my mother and said, we think he should be a screenwriter, bizarrely.
Wow, like specifically screenwriting?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
I'd made little 8mm films in high school, and they handed her the application for the USC BFA program.
Wow.
And, and I had never read a screenplay. I didn't know anyone in Hollywood. It's so much easier now for people becoming screenwriters.
Right.
There weren't any screenwriting programs. I didn't have a computer. Now you can get all sorts of scripts online.
Right.
And there's Final Draft, and there's books on screenwriting
Right.
and things like that, and digital video cameras.
Right.
But I didn't have any of that crap. And to my surprise, I was accepted to USC and decided to go. And upon arriving at USC, was promptly kicked out of beginning screenwriting for arguing too much with my teacher. And
What was the point of contention?
the point of contention was, he said that you could only tell a narrative story with a living person or animal or something in an animated film. He said you can't tell a narrative story with an inanimate object, which to me was ludicrous.
Right.
And I believe that short film Brave Little Toaster had come out that year.
Yeah,
won
yeah,
an
that
Academy
Disney
Award.
short.
Yeah, and I just said, that's bullshit. You're full of shit. And I remember I stood up on this table and I don't know, it was ridiculous.
You led a riot.
Yeah, and he kicked me out.
Now, what about the high school teachers who put you on the path? Did you ever talk to them? And
Yeah, I stayed in touch with them, and I had a nice experience a few years back, about 3 years ago, after I directed my first film, Zigzag. The University of Michigan invited me back to kind of do a master class or whatever, and we had a screening of Zigzag at there's one movie palace back in Ann Arbor, and tickets were free to any teachers, former teachers, or students from my high school, and they all showed up, and that was kind of cool.
Was there a particular moment where you gained full confidence of your skills as a screenwriter, where you didn't, I don't know if you ever had doubts, but was there a moment where you're like, I got it, this is going to work?
Yeah, actually, it was the script for Blade.
Okay.
I mean, I had been writing professionally for at least 5 years before that, and, looking back on it, I look at some of the stuff I had written and even gotten made and said, God, I can't
Pretty good
believe
Van Damme movie,
Yeah.
I thought.
Yeah, but that's
Before
like
Blade,
that's
right.
like saying, I don't know what you say, like, it's the best Steven Seagal movie. Okay, great. Or it's the best Dolph Lundgren.
Everyone has to start somewhere.
Yeah, that was the first thing I had done, which was this Van Damme movie, Death Warrant. But I think Blade was maybe the 8th or 9th script I had written.
Okay.
And it was the first time that I felt like everything just clicked.
Right.
And for me, prior to Blade, even though I wrote the script, it took about 4 years for the film to be made.
Right.
Prior to Blade, I was still auditioning for jobs. I really had to pitch myself really hard. And what was interesting with Blade, and this can happen with screenwriters, is the movie hadn't been made, but it had become this sort of infamous script that was circulating around town that people really liked. And it happens every once in a while. And you can make a name for yourself on something that even doesn't get made. And after Blade, I, for the first time, just got offered projects without having to audition for them.
That one script that kind of breaks through and is the the magic writing sample for writers. Things change after.
Yeah,
that gets
and
out.
the script for Blade changed my career.
What about film school? Do you think it does anything for anyone? And do you think, did you pick up stuff at USC that was beneficial?
I mean, I clearly did. In my case, I knew nothing about filmmaking or screenwriting, and I was just coming from Michigan. So obviously I learned something. But nowadays, with the internet and all these other tools, I don't know that it's entirely necessary to go to film school. I mean, there's so many filmmakers that didn't go to film school that are successful, and just the whole aspect of filmmaking is so much more accessible to people now.
Yeah, anyone with a Mac can produce a
In
Pixar movie.
Final Cut Pro or whatever it is, you know.
Right.
I mean, that guy that made that film at Sundance, Tarnation, I don't know if you ever saw that, but he made it for thousands of dollars.
Right. No, I saw Primer though, which was another
Primer
very
was
cheap
great.
movie,
It was made for $7,000, and that's like a really engrossing movie.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, anybody can put together $7,000.
How much is tuition per year?
Oh God, I mean, even back then it was $25,000 a year or something. So it's $100,000. I mean.
No, I'd rather make the $7,000 movie and end up at Sundance.
But then again, you know, there's only one of those a year for 5. I don't know how many films that get submitted.
Thousands.
You know, it's like winning the lottery.
Right. Is there anything in your life that prepared you for life as a screenwriter or a screenwriter director in Hollywood? Like, is there one quality you're towing from way back when that gave you an edge out here?
No, there's no quality. I mean, writers come from all walks of life, and I used to think that you had to be tortured to be a good artist, and I think to a certain extent that's true. That whether you're a musician or a screenwriter or a director or a novelist, that oftentimes if you've had a really idyllic childhood, what you produce is somewhat boring because you haven't had any adversity or any conflict in your life. That doesn't mean you have to be miserable now.
Right.
But there was a certain amount of adversity or things that I had to deal with as a child. And as is often the case with writers, you get into that as an escape.
Right.
You know, you don't want to deal with whatever it is that's going on, so you write stories or you draw comic books or you write songs. And, you know, if everything was hunky-dory and dandy, you know, you'd be out on the stickball team or, you know, whatever.
Did you have to write a lot of screenplays before your first produced one?
My first produced movie was my second screenplay.
Okay.
So I didn't have to write a lot. And I was one of those sickening guys that I sold my first script about 6 months after I graduated college and didn't have much in the way of a real job and have no idea what I would do if I didn't do this now. I mean, I don't have any applicable skills.
Right. Do the skills that you refine over the course of writing a lot of screenplays, does it result in a better one each time out?
I think that writing is something that you can continue to get better at 30, 40, 50, 60 years. You know, I mean, I think unless you're suffering from Alzheimer's or something like that. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'd like to think, put it this way. When I wrote Blade, I looked back at the scripts prior to that and thought they were crap.
Right.
And then when I wrote Batman Begins, I looked back at Blade and thought Blade was crap.
Right.
Now I hope 5 years from now that whatever I'm writing at the time, I look back at it and think Batman Begins is crap, because that means I'm evolving and continuing to kind of hone my craft.
Did you know that films like Puppet Masters or Death Warrant were a good way into the business? That there were movies people were going to make, they were going to probably make a profit? No?
When I started out, I mean, everybody's different. I was just trying to first, make a living
Right.
as a writer. And then it was, okay, now let's try to get something made. Yeah, I mean, the bar kept on being raised.
Right.
And then let's try to get something good made. And, I've had a lot of things made. I've had, I think, feature-wise, something like 17 things made. And I'm lucky enough. I remember a teacher in film school said, look, making a good movie is so incredibly difficult that as a screenwriter, if at the end of your career you can look back and feel that there's even one movie you're truly proud of, you should consider yourself a success. Well, I can look back between TV and movies now and say there's maybe 7 or 8 that I'm proud of. And, I've got 7 or 8 that I'm embarrassed by and
Right.
7 or 8 that I'm indifferent to.
Right.
I've also got a fair number of things made that I've written under pseudonyms,
Right.
which is something kind of fun.
Now, what caused that?
Well, if you have enough crappy things made, the problem with writing for film is that you are at the mercy of the director.
Right.
And I mean, I've been fortunate enough to work with a lot of good directors, but I've also worked with a lot of crappy directors.
Right. And that's where you'd use the pseudonym?
Yeah, well, at the beginning of I wish I could retroactively go back in time
Right.
and put a pseudonym on Kickboxer 2 or Demonic Toys or something like that. But
Right.
I didn't. But once I kind of got wise to that, I've used a pseudonym 3 or 4 times.
What is your pseudonym?
Oh, I have a bunch of them. I have a Cynthia Verlaine. I have Ricardo.
Does she come out at night and tickle your chin?
I have Ricardo Festivo. And
Now, do the studios know, or do the people know?
yeah, you have to
Okay.
let the studio know that you're using a
Okay.
pseudonym. And then I also have Yushiro Tegabadori. So those are the 3 so far. And I have another one that I registered that I've yet to use, Flex Gamble. So who knows?
He's on deck.
Yeah.
Have you ever had a film that you thought was going to sail into production, not go into production, never go into production, and was there one thing that stopped it from happening?
That's the thing. I mean, you learn in this business that anything can happen. I mean, all the time
Right.
you meet with producers or studios and they say, you don't understand. We're making this movie. And
Right.
cut to, we're not making this movie.
Right.
Yeah, I had a movie once that the plug was pulled 8 days before shooting, which is very late in the game. Sometimes there are movies the plug's pulled in the middle of shooting.
What caused the 8-day plug to be pulled?
I think it was casting, and they just ultimately decided, is this movie worth it or something like that. Then now that movie was ultimately made as a TV movie, and Cynthia Verlaine wrote that movie.
I see. How do you know when to really give them a fight and when to pick your battles? Like how do you know when to really to fall on your sword for a point of view or a project or?
That's a hard one, especially as you're starting out, because there are a couple different factors involved. I mean, first of all, if you're a beginning writer and you're too difficult or too argumentative, you'll ultimately write yourself out of jobs because people say he or she is just too much of a pain in the ass.
But they want the point of view too, probably, right?
They do want the point of view, but then the other thing that happens is, as you become more successful, you've got a body of work, so you can speak with more authority and throw yourself around. Now, I reached this aha experience where, I don't know, maybe about 10 years ago, I was given a set. The other thing is that you have to be open to the idea that, to constructive criticism, that just because it's the studio doesn't mean that what they're saying isn't a good idea. And you have to really challenge yourself and find this balance between listening to the criticism and possibly doing what they're saying, and also fighting for your instincts. And there are cases where you could be in a room of people and all 10 of them are saying, don't do this, and you think, no, I should do the opposite. And you absolutely should stick to your guns.
Right.
And what I realized 10 years ago is if I really hate the notes, and I really think that these notes just completely screw with the integrity of the piece, I won't do them. I'll walk. And usually 9 times out of 10, that so freaks them out.
Right.
I'll say, give back the money, whatnot, that I did it with you once. You were pissed at me.
Which one? Refresh my memory.
I did an early draft of Freddy versus Jason.
Oh,
Do
I
you
don't
remember
remember
that?
it. No, I don't remember.
And I...
Was that when Rob Bottin was?
Yeah.
working?
Truth be told, I didn't really want to do the project to
Right.
begin with, and you kind of talked me into it. And my heart wasn't in it, and we did a draft, and it sucked. And I said it sucked, and you guys wanted me to do a certain amount of notes, and I just like,
Get me off this train.
yeah, exactly. 10 years later, they made it.
Did you ever see the eventual movie?
Did I ever see it? The irony is 10 years later, I ended up being boonswaggled into script doctoring the damn thing.
See?
I spent 5 weeks on that. Ugh.
It was fated to be you and Freddy and Jason.
Yeah, exactly.
You're lucky they didn't draft you for the Freddy, Jason, Chucky, Ash from Evil Dead movie.
I know. But like every writer in town like worked on
Right.
Freddy versus Jason. I mean, there were 13 different scripts written and millions.
I think Cynthia Verlaine took a shot.
Probably.
Now that you're directing your own material, did New Line trust you more because it's one-stop shopping for the vision? They dealt with you as a writer.
Yeah, I think New Line did trust me because in terms of things that had been made, I'd been involved in 5 or 6 things with New Line that had been made, and maybe 10 things, other things that hadn't been made. So there was definitely a comfort level between us.
Have you turned down other assignments besides running away from Freddy versus Jason?
Oh yeah, I turn down assignments all the time.
I know you turned me down again for Ghost Rider.
I did. I did turn you down for that.
Well, I guess what is it? Your schedule, but also that you have to be turned on by the material.
Well, yeah. I mean, in that case, I actually could not do it.
Right.
Because I was about to direct a pilot, but I turn things down all the time. I mean, that's one of the nice things about hopefully becoming more successful is you can become progressively more selective.
Right.
And,
Do you think you'll continue to be open to direct other people's scripts as well as write
yeah.
those?
Well, we'll see what the experience is like after I do it, but I think so.
You're gonna let the writer on the set?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's good to have the writer on the set because it's important to have somebody who can protect the integrity of the story because when you are directing, you're shooting it out of order.
Right. It's little pieces.
And it's little pieces, and you're overwhelmed by costume and continuity, and the actor won't come out of their trailer, and whatever it is that you're dealing with, and the actor might want to make some line modification, and you're not thinking at the time, oh, but if I change that line, it's going to screw up this scene later on down the line.
Right.
But the writer is, because the writer's got
Right
it
there.
in his or her head. So I think that's important.
At this point in your career, do you know what the best thing you've ever written is?
I think,
I mean, produced or not produced, but do you know
yeah,
that's
well,
the best thing ever?
The best thing ever written, I think, for me, produced, is Batman Begins, so far. I think the best script I ever wrote, not yet produced, is an adaptation of a Neil Gaiman short story called Murder Mysteries. And that's admittedly something I hope to direct, but is more of a Dark City.
Right.
It's a much more challenging, not sort of down the middle movie.
Do you like you still like those complex narratives, those puzzle boxes?
I do.
Right.
I do. I mean, you do too. I
yeah.
mean, they're not always going to
Right.
burn up the screen in terms of box office.
Right. I think what I learned is that we have very peculiar tastes, and
Yes.
budget should be watched.
Yes. Yes. I mean, look.
Although we did have Matrix 2 seconds before Matrix.
I know. What's frustrating is the Matrix came out, a year later or something like that, and
With that's how you make that idea commercial.
exactly.
I forgot how to do
Exactly.
This is a hard question to answer, but do you feel you have one weakness as a writer? I know you want to broadcast this to the studios.
I think that writers tend to gravitate, either they're more character writers or more plot writers. And I think that's a kind of a fundamental way that writers approach things.
Right.
And a lot of writers will write characters first and sort of see where those characters take them.
Right.
And other writers will work from a place of structure and plot and back into that. I mean, it's still difficult for me, I think, to write female characters, just because I don't have a vagina.
Right.
No, I'm kidding.
They sell those down on Melrose.
Yeah.
The rubber wrap.
Yeah, that's still difficult for me sometimes.
What do you do to improve in that area, knowing that that's a weakness? I mean, do you seek?
Go down to Melrose.
Do you talk to women about characters when you're writing a script with female?
Yeah, and
characters?
you say, will you read this? Can you see if it rings true or not? And you try to do whatever research you can.
Right. No, actually, the Katie Holmes character in Batman Begins and Nebuchadnezzar Wright and Blade were both pretty strong female characters.
Yes, and I like writing strong female characters, but I'm aware of the fact that I don't want to make them too strident or too.
Right.
Look, I think I can do it. It's just something that I.
That's one area you think,
Yeah.
You and Oliver Stone. Was there a a point in Batman Begins where you guys hit a roadblock and it took you a little bit of time to bust through it? Was anything difficult in the refashioning of that myth?
I remember saying to Chris at one point, near the end of the second act of the film, that it would be great if there were a certain amount of symmetry if Ra's al Ghul, when he comes back, could burn down Wayne Manor. And I remember thinking that, A, that would be something that the audience wouldn't expect because it's not in the canon.
Right.
I think, well, they're not going to destroy Wayne Manor because we know Wayne Manor continues
Right.
and exists. But I know it seems obvious now, but it took us months.
To figure out how?
Just to figure out, well, they can rebuild it.
Oh.
At the end of the, I mean, it's like, duh.
Right. Well, that's how reverently you treated the canon. If in your mind that house always existed, and if you
Right.
tear it down, it's gone.
Right.
Right.
But then we thought, but that then fits with the theme of the movie of rebuilding Gotham.
Right. And you managed to get in a few lines about, that imply that they can make improvements to the
Exactly.
cave. Yeah.
To build a better Batcave and things like that. And
Right.
I mean, I think that it was also trying to figure out the machinations of getting Ra's al Ghul back into Gotham and linking Ra's al Ghul and the League of Shadows into sort of having perhaps had a presence in Gotham before. And, that was a tricky movie to write.
Right.
Also because we were dealing with a non-linear structure.
Right. You've worked in the same genre a lot. Have you ever cannibalized unproduced scripts for
All the
scripts that
time.
became produced scripts?
All the time. I mean,
They're yours. Why not?
yeah, exactly. I mean, I remember utilizing a bit I wrote an unproduced script for Doctor Strange for Sony, and I utilize that in another bit, or sometimes I'll come up with a line or,
Right.
A scary sequence and cannibalize it. You're allowed to copy from yourself, especially if it's never seen
Right.
the light of day.
Where do you find inspiration for the stuff you come up with?
I'm a voracious reader. Oddly enough, I'm not a voracious consumer of movies.
Right.
I mean, I watch movies and I watch TV, but I wouldn't describe myself as a cinephile, but I do read constantly. And on my bed table, there's 4 or 5 books that I'm reading simultaneously, and
Right.
I read all sorts of stuff.